Drupal Camp Asheville. Woo! Yes. So let me readjust this right here. So this, if you cannot read, is the future of Drupal theming, AI experience builder, and beyond. My name is Mike Herschel. I have been in Drupal for over 18 years. Holy shit. And I am the primary developer and maintainer of Drupal's default theme called Olivero. I'm a CSS subsystem maintainer for Drupal core. I help out the Drupal front end wherever I can. I've helped get many front end features into Drupal core, including things like single directory components, which I will talk a lot about, you know. I have a 14-year-old daughter, 2 bad dogs. I'm a fan of open, fast, accessible websites, and I am a founder of a new company called DripYard. DripYard is going to be is the baddest ass company you've never heard of. We are making commercial premium Drupal themes that don't suck, that are component driven, built with best practices. We don't have any for sale yet, so you'll have to wait a little while. Today we are talking about the past. We're going to talk about how we got to the present, where we're at with the present. I want to give you some tips and tricks and best practices so you can take something home and start using stuff immediately. And then we're going to talk about where things are going, and that includes things like Experience Builder, artificial intelligence, and the web platform, and kind of how to write components today that you don't have to go back and modify later to kind of future-proof everything. So who here has been involved with Drupal 5? Couple, Drupal 6, a couple more, Drupal 7, almost everybody probably. With Drupal 5, and between Drupal 5 and Drupal 7, we had PHP template, right? This is prior to Twig. It was best practice to just have like this, like 1 or 2 monolith CSS files that came from some build practice or some build system like Compass SAS or something like that. You would add the styles in through the info file, and it would just kind of dump everything at you. jQuery was pretty common, and but even back then we had a very robust templating system. You could get down into the templates that you want to get down to, whether you wanted to or not. With Drupal 8, we introduced Twig and the libraries API, which allows us to be a lot more granular with how we're organizing our CSS and JavaScript, but it was still kind of normal to group all your CSS into one big file from the build process. And we started phasing out jQuery. Drupal 9 introduced Olivero and Claro, which are the default themes for Drupal core. And but it didn't really change the way that we theme. We got a little bit of easier template debugging with the dump function that hooked into Symfony var dumper, but that wasn't even until 9.5. Today we are at Drupal 10/Drupal 11, and there's a lot of really cool things that we've done. Who here is a front-end developer? Couple. Who is back-end developer? Anyone here just hanging out? Yeah, the majority of people are hanging out. Yeah. So, like, with Drupal 10 and 11, things are getting a little bit easier. And I want to kind of emphasize that there's a lot of progress being made. You know, it's a lot easier to turn on template discovery and debugging. There's a new really badass icon API in Drupal 11. There's some new Twig filters that you may or may not know of. And of course, there's single directory components. So if you have been doing any type of theming, you've probably seen this screen right here. This is the screen that turns on, it turns off Drupal's caching layer, turns on Twig discovery, and it's just easy to use. And it's not exciting unless it didn't exist, which, you know, a couple of years ago it didn't exist, and we added this in here. And I want to kind of throw this out there because we're making things easier, you know, especially for newbies coming into Drupal. We're making things easier to figure out what the heck's going on, because if you modify a template file, you want to be able to see what changes. Drupal 11.1 has a new icon API. Has anyone used or even heard of the icon API? I see like 2 hands in the audience. The icon API allows you to add icons directly through either PHP or Twig. And you do this by including a icons.yaml file in the root of either your theme or your module. And you point that to a directory within your theme or module, and that directory will just have a whole bunch of icons in it, and it'll basically load all those, right? And this will work with things like SVG. You can even do a web font if you want, like an icon font. It's an easy API, but I'm not going to go deep into it here because it deserves its own session. The documentation for it, which is the second link here, is pretty comprehensive and pretty good. If you are still running Drupal 10, like a lot of us are, you can download the UI icons module. The UI icons module has a submodule that's a backport API, so you can install that, and it will give you the full feature-rich API. And then when you eventually migrate to Drupal 11, you can just kind of remove that module. The UI icons module is also pretty awesome because it has a couple submodules in there. And one of the things that's really useful is an icon picker, like a field. You can define an icon field, and then you can just hit the choose icon button, and like a list of icons will pop up, and you can just select that. There's a couple new Twig filters in with Drupal 10. My favorite is add suggestion. Has anyone used the add suggestion Twig filter that's included in core? I see Aubrey has. Add suggestion has so many use cases. I'm going to go over a couple right here. But the most common one, like what add suggestion does is it adds a template, adds like a template suggestion name onto whatever field or entity or render array that you are chaining this onto. So in this particular case up here, like at the top, we have a node -- article.html.twig, and with the items field in there, we add a suggestion for unordered list. And that will tell Drupal to look for field -- unordered list.html.twig, which you then create. You go ahead and you throw in your markup, whatever markup you want, and it just works. You don't have to create multiple different fields that are all duplicates of each other or extending each other, etc. It's really nice. There's also the add class and set attribute filters, which do exactly what you think they do. They will add a CSS class or set an attribute on there. And this is also, like, it's pretty common to chain these together. So you might want to use the unordered list template, but add a certain CSS class so you can target it with your styles. I would do this all the time before single directory components. Single directory components makes this not as useful, but there are some really, really cool use cases that I'm going to go into in a little bit. So with all of this, like, we're making things easier. You know, it's easier to turn on, it's easier to see where your templates are coming from. It's easier to see why it's loading a particular template. It's easier to see where templates are coming from. I mean, like, how to create new templates. It's getting a lot easier, but at the same time, it's like, in a certain way, it's like a little bit of lipstick on a pig. You know, we're still, like, we're patching all these little paper cuts, but the overall paradigm of Drupal theming really hasn't changed. It's just like a crap load of templates. You know, a template with a template with a template with a template, and they all have divs, and it can get a little messy. So here we have, so now we're going to talk about single directory components. And so this is like an AI image that I generated, and then I have my friend Matteo, and I photoshopped his head on here because Matteo is like the brainchild of single directory components. He created the it was in Contrib for a while, and he did like probably 90% of the work to bring this into Drupal core. And so who here uses single directory components? Who here has not used single directory components? All right, so all of you who have not used single directory components, I'm going to change your mind right here. Single directory components are get this, a collection of items in a single directory that make a component, right? So like, hence the name. There's two required files in there. There's a component.yaml file, and there's a Twig file. The component YAML file has a specific format that you need to follow, but it's really easy to set that up. You just copy and paste it or modify it as needed. And within this component YAML file, you define the structure of all the data that this template is accepting. You know, so like if I'm accepting a title, I say this is accepting a string of text. If it's accepting an image, I say this is accepting an image. You know, if this is accepting some type of Boolean value, you define that. And this is really cool because this tells Drupal what data this is expecting, and if Drupal knows what data this template's expecting, it can build a form for that automatically. And that's really neat because that's going to play into things like Experience Builder. When you populate data from a component, you don't need to create a block and manually map your data in or anything like that. I'm going to kind of show you. There's also modules like SDC Display that you can do that right now with too. So the Twig file looks like any old Twig file. It looks like this, and all of the data has like the corresponding definitions in the component YAML file. There's also optional CSS and JavaScript files. If the JavaScript and CSS files have the same name as a component, they will automatically be loaded on the page where the component exists. And this is super cool because number one, it's not going to load this JavaScript and CSS if it's not needed, and that cuts down on your bandwidth. It makes your website load quicker. You're loading less CSS. You're loading less JavaScript. And if you can do that, you're making things better for everybody. When currently the most popular way to use a single directory component is by navigating to like the regular template file, which might be something like field-tags.html.twig or no-article.html.twig or something like that, and do a normal Twig include or a Twig embed. And when you do that, you include, but you don't include like the path to it. You do the project, which in this case would be a theme, and then the name of the SDC. So you can see like right here at the on line 1 up here, we're calling the component, and we're calling the card component from the Uno project, right? And so at that point, it's going to load it. We're going to pass in our props. If you're using an embed, you can pass in Twig blocks, and everything will just work as expected.
Could you hit Control plus twice?
No, I can't because this is a screenshot.
Never mind.
But the slides are up on the website, and yeah, and I can even give you like code examples if you'd like. So single directory components are a big shift. You know, it's really nice because you group all the code for a component into this one directory. You don't have to jump around, right? Drupal knows how to build the forms for this. This is like pretty awesome, you know. But is that as good as it's going to get? Like, is this where we're finally going? So we're going to talk about the future of Drupal theming, and you know, there's a big asterisk, you know, a big disclaimer on here, and that is that everything is still evolving. You know, like right now, there are a large group of people working on Experience Builder. Experience Builder is slated to be the go-to page builder for Drupal. It's going to be better than Layout Builder, knock on metal, and like from what I've seen, it's glorious, but best practices are still evolving. So there's a number of, when you're creating themes, there's like a number of challenges, and there's a number of different thought processes that you have to go through. You like, what deserves to be a component? Can you use this same component with or without Experience Builder? How how do you tell experience, like let's say I got a string of text, how does Experience Builder know whether there should be a text area or a normal text input? How is it going to do images, like if we want to use responsive images, or if we want to lazy load or not lazy load, like how is all that going to work, and how is it going to handle layout? And these are all like really, really good questions. So not everything should be a component, but most things kind of should be. So tip, like I start out, the things that are definitely not components are obviously like your global design tokens, your CSS variables, any type of base styles, buttons, text inputs, form elements, all of that type of stuff does not need to be components because it just kind of over abstracts things, How do we make your single directory components ready for Experience Builder? So there's a number of like interesting ways that interesting problems that Experience Builder has hit. So one of the problems is that if you have a required field, Experience Builder tries to render that component immediately, but it doesn't know. But when it renders it, it needs to put something into this required field, but it doesn't know what to do that or what to put in there. So the way to handle that is there's an examples key at the bottom here, and this examples key will tell Experience Builder what to load when it first renders that component into Page Builder. You can have more than one, and it'll kind of alternate through. If you do not have that examples key in there, you will not see that component available. And you're like, how would you know this? How would you expect to know this? So there is a component status kind of, it's a lister's dashboard. And if you look at this screenshot right here, this is from a little bit before. It used to live under admin structure, but now it's under admin appearance. And if I were to guess, it's probably going to be moving around. For me, it would make more sense to put it under like admin config development or something like that. When you get to the component status screen, it'll give you your list of components. It will tell you if these components are enabled, disabled. You can actually disable components that you might want to that you might not want to be available in Experience Builder. And if something is not available in Experience Builder, it'll do a best effort on telling you why. And it's pretty good with that. Experience Builder, when you're defining your SDCs for Experience Builder has you can see this $ref key right here that references some of the schemas within Experience Builder. This is how Experience Builder knows that you are, like for the top code sample here, this is how it knows to load the image widget. And it'll load like a little button that references media library or something like that. At the bottom, the bottom code snippet is how you tell it to load a text area if you don't just want like a normal text input. You can see I have at the bottom of this slide a link that links to all of the definitions that Experience Builder defines. But beware with that, some of those are going to be yanked. It has a lot of like really, really older stuff in there that's probably going to be yanked out. So one of the issues with Experience Builder, and this is like the big warning sign that I have on here, is if you put these $refs into your component.yaml file and you do not have Experience Builder enabled or downloaded, it will blow up your component. And so what that means is that you cannot have a component that has like an image widget that currently supports both Experience Builder and non-Experience Builder. There's some ways that we're trying to get around that, and we might be able to like copy that schema definition directly from Experience Builder and throw that into this. But at that time, if they update it, you're going to need to update all your components that use that. So I typically just kind of throw it in there and comment it out with the thought process that like if you're using Experience Builder, you can uncomment that, and that's it's kind of like it's really it's kind of an annoyance. I'm not quite sure if there's any way around that. So when Experience Builder gives you, like, if you're using Experience Builder and you upload an image, the data that's given to your component looks like the top code snippet up here. And it gives you an image object. It throws in the width, the height, the alt text, and the source. And that's really easy to do. That's really easy to work with. You can just loop through all the attributes and add those to an image tag, and it just works. But Drupal, if you're not using Experience Builder, Drupal gives you what's at the bottom, which is like a nest, like 30 levels of divs with an image tag somewhere in there. And so, like, how do we build a component that can handle both of these? This is a component that we call image or media, because it can take either. And what it does is it looks for that image source key. And if it sees image source, at that point, we assume that we're getting our data from Experience Builder. At that point, we just look through each of the keys in there. We add them as an attribute. And that's really nice because that means we can set things like loading or fetch priority or something like that that lets the browser know how to download the image if it wants to prioritize it or deprioritize it or something like that. If it does not see that image source, at that point, we assume we're just going to get some full HTML from Drupal, but we're using this new add suggestion filter that I talked about earlier, and we pass in bear, and that tells Drupal to look for field --bear.html twig, and within field --bear, we yank out all those wrapping divs, so we don't have to worry about those. And we also check to see if the theme key exists in that, and if so, we add another suggestion for bear, which will then tell Drupal to load media --bear.html twig. And that's super useful, like if you're using media library, but you don't want all these layers of divs, this will output just like the standard, image tag. And it works pretty well. So coming soon to single directory components is a syntax that's not going to quite look like this. And from what I'm understanding, this is going to be very soon to Experience Builder, like potentially even next week or so. And what it is Experience Builder will have an image service that basically you can pass in an image file. You can add some parameters onto your URL that you're requesting from it, and at that point it will automatically look at those and generate the image. And this might actually make its way into Drupal core too, and this would be super exciting for components because, like, the alternative of this, at least in standard Drupal, like if you want to create a component, the component's expecting like an image that might have a minimum image size or a maximum image size or a certain aspect ratio. But the only way to get that currently is by going into your view modes, creating some image styles, maybe setting up responsive images, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of that is a lot of work. It's definitely a lot of clicking around. And if you're not familiar with Drupal site building, like many people aren't, it's really, really difficult. So that's super exciting. So another tip that is something that I'm trying to get, like, it's just like a best practice when you're creating your component, is let the container of the component dictate the spacing. And this is super important because if you have a component, you do not know where this component is going to exist. Components can contain other components. So an example of this is, like, we might want this XL spacing if the accordion group is in, the main flow of the page. But what if we want to put the accordion group into, like, say, a slot within the hero or something like that? You want the hero to dictate that spacing. So this is just kind of something that will make your components more modular. You can ship them in and out of your different themes, and it just makes things a little bit easier. So there's a big gotcha in single directory components that I also want to make everyone aware of, where the CSS for single directory components will get loaded before your theme CSS. And source order in CSS matters because what will happen is it will, if you define like a button, like .button CSS class within your theme, but then you try to override that in your component, the theme will take precedence because that CSS gets loaded later. And that's kind of a pain in the butt, but if you can work around that by doing like hacks like this, like adding like a class attribute or chaining your classes together. That will provide extra specificity. And that's typically what I've done, but if you are on the latest version of Drupal, I think it's either 10.5 or 11.2, that bug has been fixed. So for all of those who have been running into that, that's something to be aware of. If you are creating themes that support older versions than the current latest, you might still want to add that extra specificity onto your CSS classes. So I don't know if anyone has seen like some of the Dries notes and they have the demos where they're creating components. Experience Builder allows us to create components directly within the web browser. And this is nice because everyone who has tried to set up a Drupal local without help for the very first time, you probably ran into a lot of issues. It can be a little bit difficult, but this is nice. So you just get the proper permissions and you can define your components. The components, it's basically like JSX. So if I know that the screen is kind of small here, but imagine like a small, very basic React component. Under the hood, I believe it's actually Preact that's running. And so you define your components up there, up in the center, and you have a preview to the top right, and then you can map data to your props near the bottom. And this is super cool because like if I'm a front-end developer and I want to create a very quick component, I can just whip this up without having to go through any type of version control or anything like that, which is a little scary. But at the same time, these are exportable to version control. There's a command line utility where you can export all these. And that kind of brings us into like, where does AI fit in? I was turned on. I was turned on to this tool called bloat.new, and it's one of those kind of standard AI tools, right? And so I'm like, all right, well let's just kind of see what it creates. Let's see how this goes. And so I told it to create an accordion group component using only vanilla JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. Well, even before I said that, I had to specify vanilla JavaScript, HTML, and CSS because the first thing it did was React. And of course it's using React because there are so many examples of React on the web, you know? So I told it to use vanilla. And it actually created it, and you can kind of see it in action. It's not very pretty. Looking a little closer at the code is all divs, you know, so it's not accessible at all. You know, it's not semantic. But at the same time, it works. So it was there, and it kind of worked. You know, if you were to ship this directly into production, it would probably be bad. But who's to say in like 3 or 4 years if this is going to be good? Like if it's going to give semantic accessible markup. Another thing that it did right here is it loaded all the HTML into the JavaScript, which of course there's kind of no point for that, but that's what AI decided to do. Which brings us back to Experience Builder. So Experience Builder, these components are mostly React or React-like, right? So this UI is begging for some type of prompt where I can say, hey, Experience Builder, create me a card component. And the card component will spit out some markup at the top. You can then maybe correct the markup if it's not accessible or something like that. You can map your props on the bottom right. You have a preview at your top right. And at that point, we're getting really close to the point where marketers, like a technical marketer, can get in here and actually start creating components, which is cool and like a little terrifying. Like, where's my job going to be in several years? You know, to tell you the truth, I'm not quite certain. But like, there's a lot of excitement and a lot of cool things like that. And yeah, so questions. And thank you, by the way. But any questions? Someone has to have a question.
The experience builder that you just, I didn't realize you could use React components in experience builder. That's amazing. Is that like the plan going forward?
Yeah, so Experience Builder, like by default, it works with single directory components, right? And single directory components are Twig, whatever JavaScript you want. They can be React or anything like that, right? But the initial plan was to do editing of components directly, or editing of single directory components directly within Experience Builder. There was some security implications with that, which is why they went the JavaScript route. And I also like suspect that AI understanding JavaScript better than it understands Drupalisms was another part of this too. But yeah. More questions? Go ahead.
Is there an upgrade path from Layout Builder to Experience Builder, or what would that look like?
Yeah. So the question is there an upgrade path from Layout Builder to Experience Builder? Not yet, but that is on the roadmap. Layout Builder is the first one I know they were going to tackle. There's also plans to create some type of upgrade path migration scripts or something like that coming from things like paragraphs or things like that. But there's like a whole, like, one of the problems with Drupal, as you all know, is like we have never had a de facto page builder. You know, like it was supposed to be Layout Builder, but then Layout Builder just kind of, they quit development on Layout Builder, you know, and then things like panels were around for a very long time, display suite.
Panels and core.
Yeah, panels and core, like there's, gosh, like there's paragraph, what do you call it, field paragraphs or layout paragraphs, and like there's so many different ways to do it, just Gutenberg, but like there's never been like a de facto one, and I'm really excited about Experience Builder because hopefully the community will kind of coalesce around one way to do this, and at that point all the energy will be improving this one thing, and this similar to like how we do with like web form. You know, we don't have 20 different page builders with Drupal. We have one main one and maybe a few others, and then all this effort is the community improving web form, which is why web form is so awesome. More questions? Go ahead.
Last week, that team just announced Display Builder. They got
Yeah.
an alpha very recently, like a couple weeks ago. I think they just did alpha too.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that in comparison to Experience Builder? I know they're not the same, but
Yeah.
you cross vectors in some places.
Yeah, so the question is, the UI suite team created a page builder, and I actually talked to one of the main maintainers of UI suite is a guy named Pierre I forget. Yeah, and like I had a conversation with him at DrupalCon, and he was really concerned about the technical debt that Experience Builder is bringing on. You know, because Experience Builder has tons of like NPM dependencies. Like I would assume its node modules directory is into terabytes by now or something like that. And
When is it known?
yeah, exactly. And like I like everything that he does because he's a smart guy. He's a maintainer of single directory components now too. I feel like this gives us an alternative if Experience Builder does not pan out. I feel that Experience Builder, like while it's being built for the Drupal community, it's also being built by Acquia. And when Acquia, like as they're building it, they have their side eye on making sure that this thing works for them and the products that they have in their roadmap, you know? And the page builder that Pierre and his UI suite team over there is more of a pure community. And I don't want to knock anything about Acquia either, because Acquia is literally dumping millions of dollars into Experience Builder. They see the problem. And it's not only Acquians working on Experience Builder. Acquia is contracting tons of core committers that are outside of Acquia. So if Acquia ceases to exist, there will be people who built it still in the community. So I don't want to throw any shade on Acquia, but the fact is like they are not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. They're doing it because they're a company that's controlled by private equity, and they want to try to find that happy medium to like, let's push Drupal forward while we're making money. Does that answer the question? I think I went off on a little tangent.
It's an interesting tangent because it does.
Yeah.
It brings a little bit like automatic approach to Gutenberg. How it's kind of built for their personal goals, but also for the community. Not quite so well at all.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same situation.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I like the work that he's doing, and I like, but I really want the community to coalesce behind one thing, and I want this one thing to be successful. And I feel like Drupal is missing its page builder. That's where like every other content management system is just kicking our asses, especially in the eyes of marketers. More questions? Go ahead.
The shortcomings of layout builder and other page builders that Experience Builder is solving, and do you know of any shortcomings or foresee that Experience Builder might have?
So the question is, like, Experience Builder is solving a lot of shortcomings, but it's going to obviously be introducing its own shortcomings, right? So what are those shortcomings? So, like, I pay attention to the Experience Builder channel in Slack. I pay attention to, like, every once in a while I have conversations with, like, maintainers of Experience Builder and kind of ask some questions just to make sure I don't get up in front of a crowd and spat out nonsense. So when I first started like playing around with Experience Builder, it was really, really fragile. It was really easy to break. If you put in a component that had something wrong, like everything, it was like impossible to troubleshoot, right? So prior to this talk right here, about last week, I was like, all right, I'm going to pull down the latest Experience Builder, and I'm going to start playing around with it. And it was a lot better. It was like significantly more stable, and it felt more responsive even. It's like those little things, like when you're dragging stuff around, is it quick? And it felt, and I think that's going to be really that's going to affect whether it wins or loses. How does it feel? And stuff like that, and that makes me like really, really excited. Some of the problems that I've highlighted with Experience Builder, and this is more of a problem with single directory components rather than Experience Builder, is that right now it's impossible to have a component, like you have a slot inside of a component. Let's call this, we have an accordion group component, and we have a slot inside this accordion group component called like accordion item content. And the only thing that I ever want to insert into the slot is the accordion item component. Right now, there's no way to enforce that. And like what we need to do is we need to create some type of definition within those component YAML files to say that this slot only accepts this type of components or something like that. And at the same time, you might need a reverse relationship that says this component can only exist in this slot. It gets a lot more complicated than that. There's an issue where Pierre, who's what we were talking about him earlier, we're going back and forth with Lori Timley, who's the lead of Experience Builder, me and a few other people, and I don't know if there's been any progress on that recently, but that's something that is like super useful for the end user, because I don't want my end user to create an accordion group component and then start dumping in cards. Like, it's just not going to work. It's not going to look good, and they're going to think things are broken. And that goes back to user experience. So there's things like that that is not necessarily experience builder that we're going to have to solve. As I said, experience builder, when I played around with it last week, was a lot more stable. But I guarantee, between all the JavaScript and everything that's being written, it's probably going to be a little finicky at times. Like some of the question, is how does it handle invalid components? Like I created a component, and when you're defining your data, you can set the format of the data. But then in my examples, I had some data in there that didn't meet that format, and of course that blew everything up. How does it handle stupid edge cases like that is going to be really, really important. More questions? All right, I'm going to call it. Thank you, everybody. And I will be at the after party later if y'all have more questions.